If you could rewind all of history, what's the single greatest story of exploration ever told?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's not about spaceships. It's not even about climbing mountains. It's about how one small group of early humans, starting in Africa, managed to become the entire population of the planet.
It really is the ultimate origin story. And
Yeah.
what's so amazing is that we know pretty much exactly where it all began.
Right. Eastern and Southern Africa.
Yep. All the evidence, the oldest tools, the earliest human remains, it all points there. We're talking about the very beginning of our species, Homo sapiens, maybe 300,000 years ago.
And these weren't, primitive cavemen. These were people fundamentally like us. They were skilled. They were creative.
And highly cooperative. They were living in small, mobile groups, perfectly tuned to their environment. Expert hunters, master gatherers.
And the African climate at the time was pretty generous, which led to a big problem.
Or a big opportunity. Population growth. And that growth is the engine for this whole global journey. I mean, when you have too many mouths to feed in one area, the pressure builds.
So it wasn't some big meeting where they planned an expedition.
Not at all. It was gradual, a necessity. Groups on the edge of a territory just start looking a little further, what's over that next hill. And that constant search for new resources is what ended up pushing humanity across the entire world.
Okay, let's unpack that journey. So if necessity was the why, nature itself was basically the map. What were these environmental drivers, the world's first GPS system?
It all comes down to climate change. Massive, massive climate change. We think of deserts like the Sahara as these permanent, impossible barriers.
Yes, total wall of sand.
But they weren't. We know there were periods of really heavy global rain that would just transform these regions. The Sahara would become a lush, green grassland.
Wait, green? With rivers?
With flowing rivers. These green corridors were like temporary highways allowing people to just walk right into North Africa and eventually into the Middle East. But the key is, these corridors would vanish when the climate shifted back. So groups would get, sort of trapped or forced to move on and find a new home.
And that pressure connects right to following the food, right? They were tied to the movement of these huge herds of animals.
Their main source of protein and fat, yeah. And it wasn't simple. You had to be smart enough to anticipate migration routes to know the seasons. But the geography also had to cooperate.
Which brings us to the ice ages.
Exactly. When the world was deep in an ice age, huge amounts of ocean water were locked up in these massive glaciers. So sea levels dropped.
How much?
By as much as 400 feet.
400 feet? That's incredible.
It is. It means entire coastlines, shallow seas. They just became dry land. These temporary land bridges literally paved new routes for them to walk across.
So climate gave them the path, but they still needed the right gear to survive in these totally new places. Let's talk about the tech, the essential survival technology.
Number one, without a doubt, was stone tools. They were the universal toolkit.
And this was serious technology, not just grabbing any old rock.
Oh, this was engineering. They were selecting the right materials, like obsidian, and using really precise methods to flake off perfect, razor-sharp edges.
And the tools got better over time.
Dramatically better. Early on, you see these kind of general-purpose hand axes. But as they traveled, they developed specialized toolkits, tiny, sharp blades, we call them microblades, that they'd set into wooden handles to make spears or even fishing hooks.
So the tools weren't just for hunting, they were for everything.
Everything. Think about it. In a cold climate, you need warm clothes. You need tools to scrape animal hides clean, to punch holes in them, to carve bone needles to sew them together.
So we can actually track their movements just by the tools they left behind.
It's often the only evidence we have. The different styles of tools are like a diary of their travels.
But the greatest tool they had wasn't stone, was it? It was language.
Language was the absolute game changer. It's a non-negotiable for survival on this scale. It lets you think abstractly, plan for the future, share complex ideas.
Like which plants are safe to eat or how to navigate by the stars.
Exactly. It's how you pass down knowledge. How to chip a certain kind of stone, how to treat an injury. It's the glue that holds a group together, especially on a long, stressful journey.
But even with the best tools and communication, they had to solve the puzzle of what to eat in every new place.
Which brings us to their diet. Moving from, say, the tropics to the Arctic Circle means the entire menu gets a complete reset.
And their huge advantage was being omnivores.
The ultimate advantage. It just means you can eat a massive variety of foods. Nuts and berries in a forest, seal meat and blubber in the Arctic, shellfish on the coasts.
That flexibility basically guaranteed their success. If one food source failed, they could just pivot to another.
Right. Unlike an animal that can only eat one type of plant, humans could walk into almost any ecosystem on Earth and figure out how to make a living there.
So all these things, the climate push, the stone tools, language, the flexible diet, they all set the stage for the first big move. Let's trace that journey, starting with the Middle East.
This is where it all really kicks off. Now, there might have been earlier failed attempts to leave Africa,
Right, I've heard about those.
but the big successful wave that led to, well, us, that seems to be around 60 or 70,000 years ago.
60,000 years ago. So they leave Africa, probably crossing near the Red Sea, and the Middle East is their first major stop. Why was it so important?
It was the ultimate crossroads. From there, you could go west into Europe, east across Asia, or even back toward Africa. It was the geographic hinge for the rest of the world.
And they likely followed the coastline at first.
That's the theory, yeah. The southern dispersal route. It makes sense. The coast provides a pretty reliable menu, shellfish, fish, fresh water from rivers.
And their success there proved they could make it permanently outside of their African homeland.
It was the proof of concept. From that base, they launched the occupation of the rest of the planet.
Okay, so from the Middle East, the journey just explodes across Asia. That must have been incredibly complex.
Epic. It took thousands and thousands of years. Some groups just kept hugging that coastline, moving pretty fast across India and down towards Southeast Asia.
But others went inland, into the really tough environments, like the high plains and mountains.
And those groups had to completely change their lifestyle. They became specialists in hunting huge animals, horses, woolly rhinos, and this journey took so long, covering such vast distances, that different groups became totally isolated from each other.
And that isolation is what starts to create the diversity we see in human populations today.
Exactly. The genetic and cultural isolation over thousands of generations led to unique adaptations, unique cultures, and that coastal route. It eventually took them all the way to the islands of Southeast Asia.
Which sets up the next incredible leap. But first, let's go back west. Other groups turn towards Europe, and that sounds like a very cold choice.
Europe was probably the harshest environment they had faced yet. When they arrived around 45,000 years ago, huge ice sheets covered the north. The climate was just bitterly cold.
So survival here was all about technology and planning ahead.
100%. Fire was absolutely essential, and they were hunting massive, dangerous animals like woolly mammoths. You can't do that alone. It takes large, coordinated groups and much better weapons.
Like the atlatl, the spear thrower.
Precisely. It gives you more power, more distance, and it's also where they run into another human species already living there, the Neanderthals.
Right, so now there's competition.
Major competition for resources, which probably pushed our ancestors to become even more innovative. The amazing cave art you see all over Europe shows they weren't just surviving, they were building these deep, symbolic cultures.
Okay, so back to the east, the journey to Australia. What makes that one so important?
The Australian migration around 50,000 years ago is just monumental because it required crossing the open ocean.
Wow.
Even with lower sea levels, there was always a significant stretch of deep water between Southeast Asia and the continent of Sahul, which was Australia and New Guinea combined.
And they were crossing on what, simple rafts?
Simple rafts or basic canoes, yeah. This wasn't an accident. They had to have some understanding of navigation currents, weather, maybe following birds. It required real courage and planning.
And then they land in this completely alien world.
With animals they'd never seen before. But they adapted, and they built these incredibly complex and enduring cultures. It proved humans weren't just land travelers. They were seafarers, tens of thousands of years earlier than we used to think.
Okay, that brings us to the final continents,
Yeah,
the Americas. This happened much, much later.
much later. The main push was probably between, say, 25,000 and 15,000 years ago, right at the peak of the last ice age. And the key is a place called Beringia.
Let's talk about Beringia. It's the gateway.
It was a massive land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska. Because so much water was locked up in glaciers, the seafloor was exposed, creating this huge, cold, grassy plain.
So people weren't thinking, let's go to America. They were just following the herds.
Chasing dinner. Following bison and mammoths across what was just continuous land to them. The real problem wasn't crossing. It was what came next. North America was covered by two gigantic ice sheets.
So they were trapped in Alaska for a while.
For a time, yeah.
Yeah.
The big debate is how they got south. The old theory was that they waited for an ice-free corridor to open up between the two sheets of ice.
A narrow path.
A narrow, probably pretty bleak path. But the other idea, which has a lot of evidence, is a coastal route.
They use boats.
Used boats or rafts to hop down the Pacific coastline, which would have been exposed and ice-free much earlier.
Either way, once they got past that ice, they spread out incredibly fast.
One of the fastest expansions in human history. They adapted to everything from deserts to dense forests,
And then the final leg, South America.
which meant conquering totally new environments again, tropical rainforests, and the Andes Mountains adapting to life at altitudes so high the air is thin.
That's a huge biological challenge.
It's the ultimate demonstration of human adaptability. By the time they reached the southern tip of the continent, Tierra del Fuego, humans had successfully settled just about every possible environment on Earth.
So what does this all mean for us today, this journey?
Mhm.
It's more than just a history lesson.
It's the foundation of who we are. The migration out of Africa is the single most important event in the history of our species. It's what created the incredible diversity of cultures and languages we see today.
And that whole story is literally written inside every one of us.
Every single person on Earth can trace their DNA back to those small groups of travelers who first left Africa. That history of movement, of resilience, of constantly adapting, that's what it is to be human. We're a species that's always looking for a better life, for what's over the next horizon.
That curiosity is the real legacy of the greatest journey ever told. See you next time.